Winter, Meeting Dinery, Silver Hollow, Montana Territory. The wind screamed like a dying animal across the white plains of Montana. Snow whirled in chaotic gusts, smothering the tiny town of Silver Hollow beneath drifts that swallowed buildings whole. But the depot still stood, barely, its walls rattling with each icy blast, its windows fogged by breath and frost. Clara Whitaker sat alone on the wooden bench inside, her body curled tight beneath a threadbare cloak. Her gloved hands trembled around a cracked tin cup that once held coffee but had long since gone cold. Every few minutes she pressed her boots harder to the floor, just to make sure she could still feel her toes. She couldn't. Not anymore. In her lap lay a leather satchel, scuffed and worn, the stitching pulling loose along the seams. Inside were the final remnants of her life in Chicago. A dog-eared medical journal, $3 silver wrapped in linen, and a silver locket that held a daguerreotype of her mother. The rest, the position at St. Agnes Hospital, the reputation she'd built stitch by careful stitch, the safety of her old world, was gone. All for telling the truth. She blinked against tears, cursing the weakness they represented. She hadn't cried when the board dismissed her without a hearing, or when the newspapers painted her as hysterical and unfit for practice. She hadn't even cried when the landlady shoved her into the street, muttering about impropriety and scandal. But now, with the last train gone and the innkeeper refusing her shelter, no rooms for vagrants, he'd said, Clara felt something dangerously close to despair creep in beneath the layers of her strength. Would this blizzard be the end of her? The depot door creaked violently, swinging open under a mighty shove. Snow blasted in, curling in wild flurries around the boots of a tall figure framed in the doorway. He stepped inside, brushing snow from a thick wool coat, his presence filling the room with warmth and strength. Clara stared, too frozen to speak. The stranger removed his Stetson, revealing dark hair dusted with frost. His face was rugged, cut from wind and sun, but not unkind. His eyes were the color of storm-washed earth, brown, steady, and sharply observant. He looked at her not with suspicion or pity, but with immediate, genuine concern. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and edged in a Montana drawl, "you'll freeze to death sitting here." She tried to reply, but her jaw barely moved. Nowhere else to go. The man's gaze dropped to the satchel at her side. "You a nurse?" "Midwife," she whispered. "Name's Clara Whitaker." He nodded slowly, as if her name meant something already. "I'm Ethan Caldwell. I've got a ranch west of here, Ironwood. You can't stay in this station. Come on now, let's get you someplace warm." Clara flinched as he reached out, but his hands stopped midair. He didn't grab her. Just waited. Offered. "I'll carry you if I must," he said gently, "but not without your say-so." It was the first kindness she'd been shown in months. She nodded. Without hesitation, Ethan swept off his coat and wrapped it around her, lifting her like she weighed nothing. The storm outside roared its protest, but he pressed forward, shielding her with his body as they made their way through the snow-covered streets to the Silver Star Hotel. When the clerk hesitated, eyeing her ragged appearance, Ethan's voice turned steel. "She's with me. A hot bath, a meal in your best room. Now." No one dared argue with the Caldwell. Clara barely noticed the stairs or the fire crackling in the hearth. She only noticed the heat returning to her fingers, and the soft weight of a wool blanket tucked under her chin. Ethan handed her a cup of coffee and sat beside her, close but respectful. "You saved me," she whispered. He met her eyes. "No, ma'am, just did what any man should. The question is, what now?" And for the first time in days, Clara dared to wonder the same. The next morning dawned quiet and gray, the worst of the storm past, but snow still piled high against every building like nature's warning not to grow complacent. Clara awoke in a bed softer than any she'd slept in for years. Crisp linens, heavy quilts, and the scent of cedar filled the room. For a long moment, she lay still, unsure if it was real. She wasn't used to warmth that didn't cost something. Then came the knock. "Ma'am?" Ethan's voice, low and respectful, filtered through the door. "I brought breakfast. Figured you might be hungry." Clara sat up fast, suddenly aware of the fine flannel nightdress someone had kindly left for her. Her cheeks flushed with alarm, but then softened. She remembered how gently he had spoken, how he hadn't touched her until she gave permission, how he hadn't asked for anything in return. "I'll be right there," she called, her voice still scratchy from cold. When she opened the door, Ethan stood with a tray of food, eggs, biscuits, bacon, and coffee, and a pair of worn but clean boots tucked under his arm. "They'll do till we find you better ones," he said, setting everything down on a small table by the window. Clara blinked at the spread. "This is more than I expected." Ethan smiled faintly. "You've had a hell of a night. Seems only fair." They sat together, snow muffling the town outside. The food revived her, but it was Ethan's calm presence that steadied her nerves. No prying questions, no judging stares, just a man content to share silence and scrambled eggs. After a while, he leaned forward slightly. "If you don't mind me saying, you look like someone who's been run out of somewhere." She hesitated, then nodded. "Chicago. I was a midwife at St. Agnes. A doctor, Dr. Mortimer, tried to take advantage of me during a delivery. I broke his jaw." Ethan gave a low whistle. "Deserved it, sounds like." "Hospital board didn't see it that way." Her voice was tight. "They called me unstable. Said I created unnecessary conflict. I couldn't get hired anywhere after that." Ethan's jaw set, his dark eyes flaring. "So they punished you for defending yourself?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't believe in that," he said. "Out here, folks don't survive without backbones, and we sure as hell don't turn away people who know how to save a life." Clara looked at him, truly seeing him now. Not just the rancher with broad shoulders and a commanding presence, but a man who understood loneliness, who saw pain and didn't flinch. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I've been looking for a midwife. Put ads in 3 territories. Ironwood's big, 60,000 acres, and a lot of men who get banged up doing hard work. We've lost 2 calves this winter already, because no one knew what to do. I can offer you pay, a warm cabin, and your own medical room." Clara stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a place," he corrected. "One where you can do what you were meant to do." Her instinct screamed caution. She'd been offered things before that came with strings knotted tight, but Ethan Caldwell didn't feel like a trap. He felt like solid ground. "I'll think about it," she said slowly. He nodded. "That's fair. I head back tomorrow morning. You're welcome to ride with me, whether you say yes or not." Clara looked out the frosted window. The town was still, lifeless. No work, no future. And then she looked back at the man in front of her, the warmth in his voice, the offer in his hand. "I'll come," she said. "I can't promise how long I'll stay, but I'll ride with you." Ethan stood and offered his hand. "No promises needed, Clara. Just glad you're not letting this place bury you." As she took his hand, something flickered deep inside her. A quiet defiance, a thread of hope. She wasn't running anymore. She was heading toward something. The morning Clara left Silver Hollow was painted in gold and ice. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world glazed in sunlight and silence. Snow sparkled like crushed glass across rooftops and fences. Her breath fogged the air as she mounted the chestnut mare Ethan had saddled for her. The borrowed boots just a bit too big, the flannel coat cinched tight around her middle. Ethan rode beside her, easy in the saddle, his silhouette tall against the rising sun. He didn't rush her, didn't fill the air with small talk. He let the land speak instead. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the only sound the crunch of hooves over packed snow. Clara hadn't ridden much before, certainly not across frozen plains, but Ethan adjusted his pace to match hers. From time to time, he pointed out landmarks. A thicket where elk often bedded, a stream that ran black and quick even in the cold, a ridge where his cattle gathered in spring. It was a world both brutal and beautiful. Wild, yes, but strangely welcoming. "You ever think about staying west?" Ethan asked, breaking the quiet. Clara glanced over, her cheeks wind-burned. "I didn't think I'd make it past Kansas." He smiled faintly. "Montana's not easy, but it's honest. A person can build a life here, if they're stubborn enough." Clara held his gaze. "Stubborn, I've got." They crested a hill just past noon. Below, Ironwood Ranch came into view. She gasped. Nestled between snow-draped pines and rolling hills, the ranch spread wide and alive, barns with smoking chimneys, corrals full of restless horses, fences that stretched toward the horizon. In the center stood a large stone house with tall windows and smoke curling from the chimney. It was grand, but not ostentatious. Built to last. "That's home," Ethan said simply. A welcome she hadn't expected tightened Clara's chest. Something about the sight filled her with quiet awe. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd seen a place that looked like it could hold joy. They entered the ranch yard to the sound of barking dogs and shouted greetings. Men in heavy coats paused their work to tip their hats. Clara caught more than one curious glance, but no one sneered. No one questioned her presence. Ethan swung off his horse and helped her down. "Let me show you the cabin." It was a modest structure set near the main house, separate from the bunkhouses. When he opened the door, warmth poured out. A fire crackled in the hearth, and sunlight streamed across polished floors. A narrow cot was tucked against one wall, a bookshelf on another, and in the back corner her breath caught stood a work table fully stocked with gauze, scissors, salves, and medical supplies. "This is for me?" she asked, stunned. He nodded. "I set it up last fall. Been hoping someone like you would show up." Clara moved slowly through the space, touching each item like she was dreaming. The precision of the setup, clean, well-lit, practical, felt like someone had seen her soul and built her a place to heal it. "You believe in signs, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked. "Call me Ethan. And maybe," he said. "I believe when something good comes along, you don't let it freeze on a train bench." She turned toward him, suddenly unsure of how to thank him. "You don't owe me anything," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "But if you decide to stay, the men will trust you fast. They're a rough lot, but good-hearted. They need someone like you. So do I." His words landed deeper than she expected. Clara turned back to the window, watching snow fall from a pine bough and melt against the cabin's warm glass. "I'll earn my keep," she said quietly, "and I won't run again." Behind her, Ethan's voice was soft. Then Ironwood just got stronger. By her third day at Ironwood, Clara's hands no longer trembled from cold, but from urgency. The ranch ran on momentum and muscle, and both had a tendency to break. It wasn't even noon when the first injury arrived. A cowboy named Red, who had caught his forearm on barbed wire while herding a stubborn bull calf. The gash was long and ugly, caked with snow and blood by the time he limped into her cabin. "Doc's out of town," he muttered, trying to wave off the concern. "It's just a scratch." Clara didn't hesitate. "Sit. Shirt off. Now." Red raised an eyebrow, then obeyed. By the time she'd cleaned, stitched, and bandaged the wound, he looked at her with something close to reverence. "You sure you're not a surgeon?" She cracked a rare smile. "No, but I read a lot more than the doctors liked." Word spread quickly. By sundown, 3 more ranch hands had knocked on her door. 2 with splinters, 1 with a dislocated shoulder. Clara popped it back into place with a sharp tug and a firmer glare. That cowboy didn't complain again. Each case rebuilt something inside her. Every bandage she wrapped, every fever she broke. It was like stitching herself back together, one patient at a time. Ethan visited her cabin at dusk, his hat in his hands and a quiet pride in his eyes. "I've never seen them take to anyone so fast," he said, nodding toward the door where the last cowboy had just left with his arm in a sling. "Hank swears you could fix a broken fence just by glaring at it." Clara laughed for the first time in weeks, a sound that startled them both. "Maybe I should try that on the bunkhouse chimney," she said. "It's making more smoke than heat." Ethan leaned against the doorway, his expression softening. "I can send someone to fix that." "I don't need fixing," Clara said more sharply than she meant. His eyebrows lifted, but he didn't flinch. "Didn't say you did, just offering a hammer and nails." She met his gaze, steady and unblinking. "I'm not used to help that doesn't come with expectations." Ethan looked at her a long moment. "Then I guess I'll have to get you used to it." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged. Clara looked away first, her pulse a little too loud in her ears. "I heard about your wife," she said quietly. "Smallpox?" He nodded. 3 years ago, Rebecca. We didn't have much time, but she was good. Brave." "I'm sorry. So was I." He cleared his throat. "Until now." Clara's eyes flicked to his, surprised by the sudden intimacy. Ethan didn't elaborate, just tipped his hat and left with a simple, "Good night, Clara." She stood alone for a long while after, watching the snow fall outside the cabin window. She didn't know what unsettled her more, the way he looked at her, or the way she'd started to look forward to it. Over the next few weeks, Clara became an iron thread in the ranch's fabric. She trained the cowboys in basic wound care and infection control, earning their respect not through charm but through results. She slept lightly, worked constantly, and found a strange peace in the rhythm of the place. Evenings were the best. She and Ethan often sat on the porch with tin cups of coffee, talking in low tones as the stars burned cold above them. He told her about growing up in Wyoming Territory, about building ironwood from nothing after his father died. She told him about her mother, about the dream of becoming a doctor she'd shelved long ago. And always there was that space between them, respectful, professional, but growing warmer with every word. One night, as coyotes howled far off in the hills, Ethan turned to her. "You ever think about staying?" Clara stared out into the dark. "I think about not running. That's a start." Ethan nodded. "For what it's worth, ironwood's better with you in it." She didn't answer right away, but later, when she returned to her cabin, she found herself smiling in the dark. Maybe, just maybe, this frozen corner of the world had room for healing, hers as much as anyone else's. The scream shattered the stillness like glass. Clara dropped the tin of herbs she was sorting and ran, boots crunching across the frost-bitten yard. The sound had come from near the corral, and so had the smell of blood. A crowd was already forming. Hank stood inside the broken fence, shouting orders, while two cowboys struggled to hold down a writhing figure on the ground. It was Jesse, the youngest ranch hand, barely 17, sweet-faced and eager to please. His leg was twisted unnaturally beneath him, a slick red stain spreading across his jeans. "What happened?" Clara demanded as she knelt beside him. "Stallion spooked," Hank said grimly. "Jesse was too close to the gate, caught his leg bad." Jesse's face was chalk white, his eyes wild. "It hurts, Miss Clara. It hurts real bad." "I know, honey. I've got you," she said, already tearing open her medical satchel. "Someone get me hot water, clean cloths, whiskey, and a lantern. I need light." "Should we ride for the doctor?" one man asked. "No time," she snapped. "We'll lose the leg, or him, before Doc gets back from Helena." The cowboys exchanged uneasy glances. "Clara," Ethan's voice cut through the chaos. He was at her side in an instant. "What do you need?" Her fingers were already probing the torn flesh, bone fragments, multiple breaks. "Artery intact, but barely. I need full silence and full trust," she said, looking up. "And a long blade." No one argued. They turned the bunkhouse into a makeshift surgery room. Jesse lay trembling on a bed of clean hay, biting down on a strap of leather. Clara rolled up her sleeves, her face pale but determined. Ethan stood nearby with a lantern, jaw clenched, ready to help. "You've done this before?" he asked. "I assisted in an amputation once, in Chicago. He lived. That's good enough for me." Clara looked at Jesse. "You trust me, sweetheart?" He nodded, tears streaking his cheeks. And then she began. It was a brutal, bloody hour. Clara worked with precision and fire, her hands steady even as sweat dripped into her eyes. Jesse passed out halfway through. Ethan held the lantern firm, saying nothing, but watching everything. When it was over, Clara tied off the bandages and slumped back, her dress soaked through. The air was thick with the scent of iron and smoke. Jesse's breathing was shallow, but even. "He'll make it," she whispered, "if the fever doesn't come." The men outside broke into cheers. Ethan didn't cheer. He just looked at her long and quiet. "You saved him." Clara met his gaze, her own hollow with exhaustion. "I had no right to. I'm not licensed. I'm not even supposed to practice." He stepped forward. "Out here? You're the only chance most of us have, law or not." And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not just respect, not just gratitude, but awe. Jesse survived the night. The fever came. Clara stayed at his side for 3 days and nights, cooling his brow, changing the dressings, whispering encouragements through his delirium. Ethan visited often, bringing food, firewood, and once, a steaming mug of black tea with wild honey. "Not coffee," he said with a crooked smile, "but you're running on fumes." On the 4th day, Jesse woke up and asked if Clara had any stew. The ranch celebrated with a bonfire. Cowboys who once eyed Clara warily now raised their tin mugs to her. Even Hank called her a bloody miracle. Later that night, under a sky full of stars, Ethan found her standing near the corral, arms crossed against the chill. "You should rest," he said gently. "So should you." "I'll rest when you do." She turned to face him. "Ethan, I wasn't supposed to stay this long to rest. I told myself I'd move on once the storm passed." "But you didn't." "No," she admitted. "Something's anchoring me here. And it's not just the boy. He stepped closer. I hope not. The silence between them was rich with something unspoken, trembling on the edge of possibility. Then Ethan said, "Whatever you're running from, we'll face it together if you let me." Clara's heart swelled, and for the first time in years, the weight in her chest eased. "Not yet," she whispered. "But maybe soon," he nodded. "Soon's good enough." Spring crept into Montana like a cautious child, melting snowbanks, softening the earth, coaxing green from frozen ground. Life at Ironwood Ranch bloomed with the season. Calves were born, fences repaired, laughter returned to the bunkhouse. Jessie, now hobbling on crutches, became a living testament to Clara's skill and grit. Clara herself was changing. Her cheeks were rosier, her voice steadier. She smiled more, especially when Ethan was near. But the past doesn't wither like winter. It hibernates. And sometimes it awakens. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Clara had just finished tending to a colicky mare when a rider appeared on the horizon. Not a cowboy, not a townsman, a stranger. He wore a tailored overcoat and city boots, his horse too fine for the terrain. Dust clung to his cuffs, but his posture reeked of authority and judgment. Clara froze when she saw him. Her breath caught, her grip on the reins faltered. "Miss Whitaker," the man called, dismounting with sharp grace. "You've been difficult to locate." Ethan appeared from the barn, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" The man ignored him. He looked only at Clara. "I'm Dr. Louis Penfield, from Chicago." The name was a blade. Ethan stepped closer, sensing the tension. "You're here on business?" "Legal and medical," Penfield replied coolly. Clara Whitaker fled charges of negligence. A child died. Her license was revoked. She disappeared before formal hearings concluded. The yard went still. Clara's voice was low but clear. "That hearing was a trap. You know it. The mother was a senator's niece. She demanded justice." "She demanded a scapegoat," Clara snapped. "I did everything right. The child was born too early, too fragile, but they needed someone to blame." Penfield turned to Ethan. "Is this the kind of woman you trust to deliver babies and cut into broken boys?" Ethan didn't flinch. "I trust what I've seen with my own eyes. You should have been here last month when she saved a boy's life in the snow." Penfield's lips thinned. "She has no right to practice." "She had every right to keep that boy breathing." Clara stepped between them. "What do you want?" Penfield handed her a folded paper. "An order to appear in court. In Helena. They'll reopen the case. You can tell your side, if it matters anymore." Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. That night, Clara sat alone on the porch steps, the court order clenched in her fist. The stars above Ironwood had never looked colder. Ethan joined her, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "You should be furious," she said. "You brought me into your home, your life. I should have told you." "I knew you were running," he replied softly. "But not why. Now I do, and I still trust you." Clara looked down. "What if I go to court and they ruin me all over again? Take everything I've rebuilt." "What if you go?" Ethan said, "and they don't?" She laughed bitterly. "You think I'll get justice in a room full of men like Penfield?" "I think," he said, placing the mug in her hand, "that Montana's not like Chicago, and you're not alone this time." She met his gaze, and something fierce and fragile sparked between them. "Will you come with me?" she asked. "I'll saddle the horses at dawn." A week later, they rode into Helena together, Ethan in his best wool coat, Clara in borrowed gloves and trembling resolve. The courthouse loomed like a fortress. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than expected, warmer and packed. Word had spread. Cowboys, townsfolk, even Jesse, hobbling on his crutch, stood in the back like a sentinel. Penfield presented his case, citing legal documents, disbarments, reputations. Then Clara rose. Her voice didn't shake. She spoke of the birth, the infant's lungs, the mother's demands, the hospital's pressure, the silence of those who knew better. And then she spoke of Jesse, the snow, the risk, the healing. When she finished, there was no applause, but there was a hush. The judge asked one question. "Do you intend to practice again?" Clara lifted her chin. "Yes, sir, where I'm needed." He nodded once. "Then let it be on record that this court finds no cause to bar Miss Whitaker from work within Montana. The matter is closed." A breath released across the room. Relief, like spring, thawed the chill. Outside the courthouse, Ethan caught her hand. "You were brilliant," Clara blinked back, tears. "I feel free. You are." The court's decision followed them home like the first scent of summer, soft, almost surreal. Back in Silver Hollow, Townsfolk offered nods and smiles that once would have turned away. Clara felt their eyes no longer as threats, but as questions. Will you stay? At Ironwood Ranch, life resumed. The rhythm of branding season pulsed through the land, and Clara worked alongside the ranch hands as if she'd always belonged. But beneath the surface, something else stirred, quieter, more tender. Ethan noticed it in the way she laughed now, fuller, from the belly. In how she touched the horses, not as if calming them, but as if feeling them. And most of all, in how she looked at him, like a woman who'd stopped bracing for betrayal. Still, the question lingered. Was she healing, or just resting? One golden evening, Ethan found Clara by the creek, her skirt gathered in her lap, feet bare in the icy flow. "You trying to catch pneumonia again?" he teased, hands in his pockets. Clara smiled without turning. "Feels good to feel something cold that doesn't want to kill me." He sat beside her, their shoulders brushing. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked. She was quiet for a while. "I thought I'd miss the city. The museums, the cafes, the noise. But the truth is," she trailed off, looking toward the horizon, "I miss the person I used to be there, before they made me small." Ethan studied her profile, struck again by her strength. "You're not small here." "No," she said, voice soft. "Here, I feel seen. Not as a scandal or a servant, just me." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Then stay." Clara turned to him, eyes searching. "Is that what you want?" He nodded once. "I've wanted it since that night in the barn, since you called Jessie back from the edge." Her breath caught. "Ethan." "I know it's fast," he said, his tone sincere. "But I've lived in this land long enough to know. When the wind changes, you don't ask why, you just build your fences stronger." Clara chuckled through the emotion in her throat. "That might be the most Montana way of saying I love you I've ever heard." He grinned. "Well then, I love you, Clara Whitaker." She leaned in, forehead resting against his. "And I love you, Ethan Caldwell." But love is never simple, not when it's real. 2 nights later, a telegram arrived from Fort Benton. The Army outpost needed a trained medical woman. A fever outbreak, dozens sick. No doctors could get through. They'd heard of Clara. "They want me to ride out tomorrow," she said, reading the crumpled note aloud in the warm glow of the ranch kitchen. Alone. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Clara looked at him. "I haven't even said yes." "You don't have to," he said, voice low. "You already decided." She reached for him. "I'd come back." He swallowed. "I know. Do you trust me? With everything I've got," and he did. Even as dawn painted the mountains in fire and Clara mounted her mare with her doctor's bag strapped to the saddle, Ethan didn't stop her. He just said the one thing that mattered. "I'll be waiting." She smiled down at him, wind pulling her scarf. "Then I'll ride faster." And with that, she disappeared into the hills, toward danger, duty, and destiny. The ride to Fort Benton took Clara 2 brutal days, through wind-carved valleys and ice-glazed ravines. She barely slept, pressing on through flurries that whispered warnings. The Army outpost was a battered speck in the wilderness, a cluster of tents and timber buildings wreathed in the stench of sickness. Inside the infirmary tent, the air was thick with fever and fear. Cots lined every wall. Soldiers and settlers alike moaned, coughed, and burned beneath soaked blankets. A young corporal met Clara at the flap. "You're the one they sent?" She nodded. "I'm all they'll need." And then she set to work. For 3 days and nights, Clara didn't sleep. She boiled linens, mixed poultices, bled the worst infections, and gave comfort to the dying. Her hands moved from body to body with a grace that came not from training alone, but from something deeper, compassion carved by suffering. On the 4th night, she collapsed. A medic found her slumped against a barrel of melted snow, fever burning under her skin. "Get her inside," someone shouted. "She's gone under." In the haze of illness, Clara drifted. She saw her father, drunk and bitter, shouting through a broken doorway. She saw Boston, red-bricked and sharp-edged, where people whispered her name like it was a curse. She saw Ethan, his eyes like storm clouds over mountains, his hand reaching for hers across firelight. "Come back to me," he said, and then everything went dark. Back at Ironwood, Ethan knew before the telegram arrived. He'd woken in the middle of the night with a start, heart pounding, a chill not from weather but from knowing. He saddled his horse before the rooster crowed and rode hard, the sun rising behind him like a warning. It took him 30 hours. By the time he arrived at Fort Benton, Clara had been fevered for nearly a day. "You can't go in," said the medic. Ethan didn't answer, he just pushed past. Inside, the tent smelled of vinegar and despair. Clara lay pale as bone, lips cracked, her hair matted to her face. For the first time, Ethan saw not the fierce midwife or the strong woman who'd tamed his ranch, but a fragile body fighting against death. He knelt beside her, took her limp hand, and pressed it to his lips. "You didn't come all this way to die," he whispered. "You still owe me that first spring dance." Clara stirred. Barely. A flicker behind her eyelids. A groan. He fed her water by the spoonful. Changed her bandages. Whispered stories about the ranch. How Jesse finally broke the wild mare. How the snow was melting. How the first crocus had bloomed by the creek. "I saw it myself," he said, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "First flower of spring. It waited for you." That night she opened her eyes. Only for a moment. But it was enough. By the 6th day, Clara sat up in bed, a bowl of broth trembling in her hands. "You came," she rasped. "I told you I would. You're stubborn. I had a good teacher." She smiled, weak but alive. "Don't ever leave me again." He leaned in, kissed her forehead. "Not even if the mountain crumbles." They left Fort Benton together 2 days later. The soldiers saluted her, whispering "Angel of the Fever" as she passed. She waved them off with modesty, but Ethan saw the pride flicker in her eyes. He also saw something else. Resolve. "You're not the same woman who left Silver Hollow," he said as they crested the last ridge. "No," she said, gazing out at the horizon. "I think I've finally become myself." And beside her, Ethan smiled, because he had always seen it, even before she believed it. Spring unfurled across Montana like a slow hymn. The snow melted from the peaks in glistening rivulets, green crept across the pastures, and calves were born in the warming fields. Life surged forward, as it always did after hardship, relentless and beautiful. At Ironwood Ranch, Clara stood on the porch with a mug of coffee in her hands, watching the horizon for signs of Ethan. He'd gone to town early that morning. Something about mail or maybe grain, but she suspected more. He'd been restless lately, distracted in a way that hinted at planning. She smiled to herself. Whatever it was, she already knew she'd say yes. When Ethan returned, his boots crunched up the gravel with a determined rhythm. Clara turned. "Get what you needed?" He stepped onto the porch, pulled a small, wrapped bundle from his coat pocket, and held it out without a word. She raised an eyebrow, but took it, unwrapping the soft muslin. Inside lay a ring, simple but unmistakably crafted by a blacksmith's hands. No diamond, just a braided silver band, strong and luminous in the morning sun. Clara's breath hitched. "It's made from my mother's brooch," Ethan said softly. "Melted it down, shaped it myself." She looked up at him, tears shining. You made this?" "I didn't want to give you something bought," he said. "You deserve something forged. Like you." Silence fell between them, but not an uncertain one. The kind of silence that feels like the moment before something sacred is spoken. "Clara Whitaker," Ethan said, voice low but steady. "You've faced blizzards and gossip and ghosts that wouldn't let go. You've stood by me, healed strangers, and tamed wild horses and willed hearts. You are strength and grace and fire, and I don't want to live another season without you by my side." He knelt, boots dusty, coat flapping in the wind. "Will you marry me?" Clara didn't hesitate, not for a second. "Yes," she whispered, knees trembling, heart pounding. "Yes, Ethan Caldwell, I will." They married beneath the cottonwoods by the creek, where the crocus still bloomed. The whole town came, not out of duty, but because they wanted to. Even those who'd once whispered now brought bread, wine, and songs. Clara wore a cream dress sewn by the ranch hands' wives, and Ethan wore his father's coat, patched at the sleeves but proud in the chest. Jesse served as best man and cried without shame. The vows were spoken not as fantasy, but as two real people promising to weather what storms remained, together. When they kissed, the wind rose in a sudden gust, as if nature itself gave blessing. In the months that followed, Clara opened a clinic in Silver Hollow. People came from miles around, not just for her skill, but for her kindness. Ethan continued building the ranch, expanding into new pastures, and teaching Jesse how to lead. At night, they sat by the fire, hands clasped, retelling stories of how it all began, with a blizzard, a broken wagon, and a chance neither of them had planned for. One evening, as summer bled into autumn, Clara sat on the porch again, now with a small swell beneath her dress and Ethan's coat draped around her shoulders. "Do you ever miss the city?" Ethan asked, rocking beside her. She shook her head. "No, the city never saw me." "And we do." "You always did," she said, turning to him, "even when I didn't." He smiled and placed a hand gently over her belly. "Think they'll like it here?" "I think they'll grow up knowing love and strength and what it means to choose your own path." They fell into quiet again, the kind that lovers share when words are too small for what the heart holds. Above them, the stars blinked awake. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and deep in the Montana night, a fire burned in the hearth of a home forged not in comfort, but in courage, and the blizzard that brought them together.